Well, Mike, I mean, you were immersed in this group, so you're fully, have known these people. I'm curious, how long is this idea, this subject kind of been percolating, and when did you decide, I need to do this, I need to tell this?
Well, I started in 2010. That was when the idea came about, and I knew, especially at that point, the station had been off the air about 6 years, and there was a lot of chat about it, especially when social media was coming about. More people were sharing, pictures, and, I wish it would come back, and there was always that thought back then that it could come back any minute. I don't think, as time has proven, that will ever happen. But, yeah, what was really funny around that time, too, was there was an old billboard on one of the freeways, and the current, modern day ad had come off during a storm, and on the base of it was an old KLOL Rock 101 Runaway Radio billboard, and people freaked out, were like out there taking pictures of it and putting it on Flickr at the time. That's a site people really don't talk about as much anymore, but that was when I was like, wow, this is still really out there, and I had always wanted to do a documentary, so I thought that's a great subject. Even though it's a radio station, it was very visual, and it did prove right that we did find a lot of material that I didn't even know was out there, videos and commercials and just different print magazine ads that did help tell the story of something that you would think was audio only, but for a radio station, very visual.
Which is crazy because, like, the Silver Surfer image, I grew up in Dallas, and I remember that. And that's a wild thing to know that wasn't out that long even. Like, that's crazy to think that this thing had so much legs. I mean, iconic voices on the radio. These are iconic figures in the industry. Was there anyone that you couldn't get or that wasn't going to talk about certain things, or was there anyone that was like, no?
Yeah, definitely. There are people who I would approach that would not respond or say they do it and then not end up doing it. And, I think a lot of times it's just people want to put things in the past maybe in there, in the current, and not really thinking about that back then. There's just different reasons why people don't want to talk about it.
I'm curious, Jeff, can you bridge how you two know each other and this connection that y'all have?
I do documentary master classes, and Mike was in one of them, and that's how we met. And I did one in Houston, and so he approached me because I do a lot of music docs. That's kind of my forte. And he had a cut, and I saw there was something good there and something that had potential. I think Mike would agree that he wasn't planning on doing something to the scale that we have now, but we were able to work on it for a long time and just make there were some real basic changes that could be made, but just kept working at it, and it took a long time, partly because COVID did us no favors at all, and things just took a long time. We do have a distributor, but that took a long time to actually, almost a year to actually fully realize itself, so that was long. COVID, chasing people. There was always something that came up that we wanted to do, which was going to make the film better. So waiting was stressful and tedious, but it was worth waiting that long to get some of these people in, new footage, new photos, new interviews, which made the film better.
Where did the title come from? I like it. I love it.
Just because the Runaway Radio is so iconic with KLOL. It had different versions through the years, but that kind of red, white, and gold, radio that literally is running is so iconic in Houston. That was what was on the billboard I mentioned. People see that image and know KLOL. No one, I've never seen anything else like it. In fact, now there are so many people selling shirts of this, all over. You can go to Etsy. There's companies in Houston now selling it, and it's just unbelievable that it won't go away. And speaking of the Silver Surfer head, today on Facebook, someone posted a picture of Iron Maiden, and one of the members of Iron Maiden was wearing one of those shirts back then, in the 80s. So it still continues on.
It's amazing the amount of talent, the Bruce Springsteen interview, the George Harrison interview, these iconic, these are very historic elements now. Why Houston? Why this station? Like, what the hell was going on in the water in Houston at this time? Like, it's wild to imagine that they changed the game for so many, not just radio, but just coverage of music and bringing in talent. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of credit goes to Pat Fant, who is one of the main people in the film who started it when he was in college. He's 21 years old. They hire him to go put on this FM rocker when FM was brand new. No one really knew what to do with FM at that point because AM was the dominant frequency. So he goes in there and has a very unique approach. He's a very unique character, full of creativity and ideas. And I think he kind of planted the seeds. And when he left, things went down a bit, as you'll see in the film, but he comes back and just it explodes at this point. And that was the time when Houston was getting a huge population increase from people around the country just for jobs and stuff. So I think all of that helped, and the way they retooled the station just made it undeniable it was going to be a huge thing.
As far as like bringing out diversity, there is a huge importance in this group of people that come about, because like in Dallas radio, we had in the 90s had a string of women radio DJs, and I think your station really has an impact on that. Can you talk about her in particular and why? I mean, you got to work with her, so you know exactly her presence, and it impacted, I think, radio for very much a long time.
Yeah, Dana Steele is just the first lady of rock and roll in Houston. People always, probably one of the top asks about DJs when you mention this film, oh, I love Dana Steele. And, clearly she had an impact. All those rock stars wanted to talk about her. I mean, many of those people that are interviewed in the film are friends of hers. So, I think that says something right there, that she was always able to become friends with the people and was, cool enough that they remembered her, and really did have such a great voice for radio too. Very memorable when you would hear her on the air. Very good. And she was, we always talk about was the internet before the internet. She always had a lot of information about the bands, where they're playing, what's happening with them. Because back then, that's where else were you going to find info about that? It wasn't really on MTV, depending on what era it was. Unless you picked up magazines, that was kind of where you got your rock news. So,
Jeffrey, I'd love to ask about taking this film outside of the Texas bubble and what it means and how it does resonate, and being able to choose kind of like how you want to spread this word out. Can you talk about traveling with this film, the Runaway Radio, getting out of Texas?
Well, this is our world premiere here in Minneapolis, and it's a good place for us because it's a music film fest, which I have a lot of experience from because we had one of those. I was part of one a good while back when I lived in the Czech Republic, and so I think it's a really good place for us to be screening the film. I think that the festival or the film works on several levels. On the one hand, it's very much KLOL is very much a story of Houston. At the same time, that story of a classic rock radio station having a huge impact on the community is something that happened in lots of other towns. That is not unique to Houston, but the Houston's our story and the KLOL story is kind of a vehicle for us to tell the story. And a lot of these radio stations suffered with some of the FCC changes, and just like in the music industry and the film industry, when things become just about commercial interests and money, then radio used to be run by people who loved music, and then it became just a good job to have and a way to make a lot of money, and you could own a lot of different radio stations in one town, and that affected everyone across the United States. So the film works in taking it out of Texas. It works on that level, and it's much more than just a Houston story. So today's our first time to screen it outside of Texas, so we'll see. But it's the equivalent of like Q102 or the Zoo, or maybe even Eagle 97 in DFW. These were known nationally by people who followed rock music or had an interest in rock radio. So it's just again, we're using that. We're telling the story. We're telling the story through KLOL, but it's a much larger story.
I'm sure you didn't set out to tell a story about kind of the downfall of radio, but very much that's a part of the story. And Jeffrey's talking very much about that, the Clear Channels of the world coming in and changing the whole atmosphere. Seeing it happen, what are your emotions of it looking at radio now, knowing we may never get back back to that radio. We've gone to streaming, we've gone to other avenues, but like terrestrial radio is completely different now. Does it hurt? I mean, a little bit it has to.
It definitely hurt when the station went off the air initially, because you could kind of see where things were heading. You were getting satellite radio is coming on. Obviously, internet radio back in 2004 was starting to become a thing. So it was very apparent, and we didn't even have podcasts yet, right? So it was becoming apparent things were going to change, and you weren't going to be able to have all that money for the advertising and radio, meaning to have all the staffs that you need to be paid. And unfortunately, it's just things don't always stay the same. And we're actually, what's really interesting was working on this, you can see the parallels between radio back in the 90s, what we're talking about, and television news today. You're seeing a lot of layoffs all of a sudden. You're seeing consolidation where one company will own 2 TV stations in smaller cities and operate both of them kind of as one, but with different brands. So that was really weird to watch, because TV, for the most part, had been very strong. And then kind of around 2016, you start seeing changes there as we were editing this. And I was like, wow, the parallels are kind of scary there, where, and now streaming is kind of done what the internet did to radio, it's doing to television. So everyone's trying to figure out what is the path forward for local TV to survive.
I'm curious, is there a radio personality that touched you on your own life? It doesn't have to necessarily be from this station. I'm guessing it might be, but, Jeffrey, I would love to know your radio influence. Who was that radio personality that first caught your attention?
Well, I definitely, that station, just kind of all of them. I first turned it on when I was a freshman in high school, and I was like, wow, this is, it felt kind of dangerous and exciting to a 14-year-old boy, and I think that's how every generation worked, where you get these teenagers in listening to the rock music and the DJs telling jokes and stuff, and you're like, wow, this is kind of like a window to another world. So yeah, I would say on that station, I was influenced by all of them. Because I thought the station from sign on to sign off, which never actually signed on or signed off, it was 24 hours, but it was a great, group of people working there.
I don't know if there's one so much that, I remember like Redbeard from Q102 back in the day. I mean, I think it's great. I think it's kind of the same way, like if you go to a restaurant, you like to see the owners there, you're someone that and so I think it was great to have that ID or some type of identification with a name like Redbeard. Stevens and Pruitt, I didn't really listen to him that much, but they were big on Eagle 97 back in the day. But I think I think there's just some sense of community or some sense of feeling like you belong when you turn on the radio and you hear someone and that's what comes out. Dana Steele says it is, KLOL was Houston. It was your community. They were involved in the community. They went out and did these things, and people like going to events, if they're going to simulcast or whatever it is, or they're going to be at a bar for happy hour on Friday afternoon. People really liked going to be able to see those people, and it was that connection. And when it's just internet radio, you feel that a little bit less. You're not going to go see these people in person, or you might be able to see them introduce a concert. And that identification, that acknowledging what Redbeard looks like, that's just one example, but what these people look like gives you a sense of belonging in your community or in your town, and some of that has just slipped away. I think it exists now with sports radio and talk radio. I mean, the ticket's huge in Dallas, and people know, and so there's a lot of what I'm talking about going on with that, but a lot of it is just, it's just not as strong as it used to be. So.
One of the elements that y'all showcased in the film is the way in which advertising money became so extravagant, became so massive that you could almost do anything. Like the Corvette story alone, I think, is one of the pivotal stories, showcases just the extravagance of it all. But I'm curious, when the money bottomed out and the payola thing kind of switched away, was it night and day, like being there, like seeing just everything's going to change all of a sudden? Like that's when we started to see the personalities fired from one station and moved to another. I mean, radio kind of started to fracture very much from that huge division.
Yeah, like especially after the Telecom Act of 1996, which we talk about in the film, was when they could buy a bunch of, one company could buy a bunch of stations, and that was when they all started moving into the same building, and they would have to almost cross promote another station. If memory serves, you would hear promotions kind of on all of them that talk about this being a cluster of stations, not just one station. And then they started having these contests where you're nationwide. I mean, you're not trying to win the Corvette just in Houston. You're competing against a whole company, a chain of stations to call an 800 number and win something. So they also, I think, voice tracking is when they were. That was when they would have someone just come in and maybe even another city start DJing shifts, because it was all computer. You could pre-record your whole show from another city and put it anywhere you want. And I think that's when things started changing, because there wasn't local flavor anymore. I mean, these people did their best to try to sound like they knew what was going on in a certain city, but when you're not there, that's very difficult to pull off. And we're still seeing that to this day. I mean, a lot of stations across the country just have a morning show as the only live element of the day, and the rest of it would be voice tracked, whether it's by people in that city or from another station in another city doing a shift.
I'm curious, this is programmed very much the world premiere at a music doc fest, but this film could play at any festival. I'm curious the trajectory of where this can go. What are you looking to touch upon, and maybe where to go? I know not specifics, but where do you hope this movie, because I feel like it's bigger than just a music doc.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's, in a lot of ways, and I think that's what makes a good doc. It's the history of Houston with a cool soundtrack, and that's, and you want that, it's, if it was just about the radio station, if it didn't have that social or that sociological angle to it, then it would be a very dry run. It's a really kind of good run down memory lane for a lot of folks, again, told through the premise of KLOL, so, but other places, we're going to screen in Austin December 9th as part of Sound Unseen there, and then we're waiting for other places. We're going to organize screenings ourselves in and around Houston, and that's our core audience, but we'll wait and see after that. I think any other, this is our kind of our launch pad, and we're going to see where we go, and that's part of why you play festivals, is other festival programmers are looking at other festivals to see what they want to put. So we're hoping that something good will come out of that, and we're hoping that we'll get to play more outside of Texas as well, and that's the expectation. But it's not going to be too long before we're on the platforms. We do have distribution, so I would say, relatively early in 2024, we plan to be out on the platforms. But between now and then, and even after the film's out on the platforms, we'll still continue what are called non-theatrical screenings, meaning in cinemas, but maybe it has to be, stuff we organize ourselves. But, there's some obvious places. It would seem like Cleveland with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that seems like a logical place. And if it's not the Cleveland International Film Festival, then it can be, it would be at a cinema. So, we'll a little bit of wait and see. It's still really early. We're just, it feels like we've been at it forever, but in a lot of ways, we're just getting going. So it's a little bit of a wait and see, but, hoping for the best.
Have you been able to show it to any of the DJs, any of the people?
Yeah, we had a big cast and crew party in Houston. So, that reception there was, of course, very warm. They were very happy with it. That wasn't a tough crowd to show it to. So, yeah, they got to relive the past through watching themselves on film. I'm sure it was exciting to kind of feel like you were back there just from the video and the images that we were showing.
Where can people find out more information about you each individually, but also how can people get attached to this film and find out more?
Well, there is a website, rock101movie.com, and it would have a newsletter and social media that you can follow to find out where we'll be playing, and that would be one of your best spots. And I have a personal site, MikeMcGuff.com, and then he also has a website.
Yeah, and he forgot to mention he has a very popular blog. So is it McGuff blog? Is that what it is?
McGuff.com.
Okay, yeah. But he has a very well followed blog. For me, the best place is bigdaypictures.net. And then, that's the best place. I have my hands in quite a few other films, but that's just probably the best place to go for me, bigdaypictures.net.
Well, gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for making the film, bringing this amazing story to the forefront. It's pivotal for us Texans, but I think it can be so much more for everyone else. But thank you, and thank you for bringing it here to Minnesota.
Oh, well, thank you, and great questions on this.
Yes.